Joe used to put drops of LSD directly onto his eyeballs. He called it window painting. The technique was born from an urban legend about a guy who got busted selling acid and panicked, consuming his entire stash to avoid getting charged with it. According to the legend, the guy downed 200 hits, lost his mind completely, and beat the charges due to being too insane to stand trial. To avoid this potential outcome, Joe never sold blotter paper, always sold liquid acid, which he administered directly out of a Visine bottle. That way, if he ever had a run-in with the law, the drugs would look like eye drops. Joe was asked on a dare what he would do if the cops called his bluff, if they didn't believe it was Visine. Thus was born the popular party trick of applying acid directly to the eyeballs. Joe was my freshman roommate in college, which was quite a culture shock for me. I'd grown up in a household with a strict curfew and a dad who smelled my breath whenever I got home from being out, so the world of hard drugs was completely new to me. Joe dabbled in everything, gobbling pills when he got the chance, snorting powder when his bank account allowed, but his main drug of choice was weed. He did everything but wake up high, which was quickly remedied by a wake-and-bake application of a sturdy bong hit. If he bothered to go to class, he went high. If he bothered to study, he did it high. When test time came, extra high. Somehow he didn't get high grades. The thing that made Joe different, though, that separated him from the garden variety stoner who wasted a number of years on the hedonism kick before straightening out to make room for a wife and kids, was that Joe had a rare degenerative lung disease. Most people that have it are dead well before college comes around, so Joe was on borrowed time that he knew he wouldn't have to return. He'd lived his whole life with death peering in the window, and now it was knocking on the front door. You could understand why Joe wasn't worried about his GPA or job prospects. Death has a way of interrupting your plans. There were lots of crazy times with Joe, lots of Sunday fun days where we'd stuff a towel under the door and turn our dorm room into a giant hot box. Lots of getting as high as possible and then going to the university pool to jump off the 50-foot high diving board. Stuff like that. The thing that sticks most in my mind, that really kicks me in the balls when I get too far stuck inside myself, came in a moment of sobriety, though. One day not too long before I died, a couple months I think, I got back from class to find Joe in a state of semi-despair, because he was out of bud and the whole state seemed to be dry. Joe had networks of connections that reached far and wide and had been known to drive as far as 6 hours each way to get a bag. On one legendary weekend, he came back with a quarter pound of kind bud, which he'd gotten on commission from a guy who claimed he'd burn Joe's parents' house down if Joe didn't get the money back to him in 48 hours. Joe made it back with 7 minutes to spare and actually drove up on the guy loading gas cans into the back of his truck, intent on carrying out his threat in a punctual manner. So this was a rare thing that Joe had literally zero viable connections. He'd even thought about getting someone he knew in California to overnight a package to him, but had been too worried about the paperwork required for speedy delivery and didn't want to risk it. It may seem like a pretty minor thing in the big picture. A drug user denied his drugs, but I knew how Joe got when he couldn't smoke. It was like the smoke was the screen obstructing the view of his impending death, and without that little bit of fog circling around him, concealing the axe about to drop, he became the dying man he truly was. Things were confounded by the fact that his birthday was coming up, just a couple days away, and we'd made big plans that were going to be seriously hampered with no bud on the menu. So I was commiserating with Joe, telling him how sorry I was at what would likely turn out to be his final birthday. It was going to be ruined. Joe was feeling philosophical, though, so he said, "It could be worse." And of course I said, "How?" And he replied, "Well, at least I'm breathing comfortably." You see, Joe was very near the end, was at the point where he was being hospitalized about once a month and where he was having way more bad days than good. So just the fact that it didn't hurt to breathe was like a fucking blessing. It really brought into perspective the things we take for granted. There might be some guy out there who can't even breathe comfortably, and here you are complaining because they didn't give you diet soda in the drive-thru or whatever else. Watching Joe die was hard, not something I really feel comfortable talking about, and living with his legacy can be exhausting. But whenever shit gets too tough, I think about him and take a deep breath. I remember the night Joe died, I couldn't sleep. I felt agitated and antsy, like I needed to move. But I had no interest in leaving our dorm room. I couldn't face the world. I didn't want to be responsible for spreading the news, so I shadowboxed. It was something Joe and I used to do a little bit. We were huge fight fans and always used to talk about how awesome it would be to be a mixed martial arts fighter. A night of fights would always have us up on the balls of our feet at some point, bouncing around, throwing combos at the air. Of course, Joe couldn't pursue it because of his health, but there was no stopping me. I resolved that night that one day I would pursue that dream for both of us. Just before dawn, I wrote a song that went, "The night so dark I felt 6 feet under. The night so silent, my heartbeat was the thunder. I'm fighting sleep, perfecting paradox, dancing with the dark, I shadowbox." I can't think of any more perfect paradox than fighting death with life, since in the end, death always wins. When all is said and done, perhaps it's like throwing punches at the air.